Hello, everyone, and welcome today to today's, this is, I guess, the first HEAS talk of the new term. So that's exciting. And we have a very busy day today because we have, as I'll tell you about in a second, we have Kira Westaway here from Australia. And then later on in the afternoon, we have David Reich from Harvard, from the USA. And so we're very excited about, we've got two great speakers today. So I am really delighted to welcome my very good friend, our very good friend, Associate Professor Kira Westaway from Macquarie University in Sydney in Australia. Kira has been, I don't know if any of you seen some of her recent papers. She's had some really stellar publications that have come out recently, particularly this year. Cover of Nature with Gigantopithecus. My God, this was a really big story. She's been nominated for all sorts of science awards in Australia. She's been doing the media stuff. It's been absolutely amazing. Anyway, let me give you a bit of background before we start, so everyone online and here in the audience. Kira did an undergraduate degree at the University of Liverpool in physical geography. And then she did a master's at the renowned University of London Royal Holloway, which is like a key place for studying quaternary science. So she did a master's there. And then she did another master's. I mean, as if one wasn't enough, she did another one. So real glutton for punishment in the University of Hong Kong. And that was on luminescence dating, which is her area of specialty nowadays. And then she went to the University of Wollongong in Australia, where Bert Roberts works. He's like one of the guns of OSL, single grain, developer of single grain and so on. And his research partner, Zenobia Jacobs. And she did her PhD there, working on things like flores and hobbits and so on and so forth. So it's a real pleasure to have you here today, Kira. She's also got this amazing new project, which we're part of here in Vienna. It's called Dispersing Myths. And I'm wearing the project T-shirt, which is my honor. So I'm going to stop rambling on now. And I'm going to hand over, Kira, to you.
Thank you, Tom. That was a brilliant introduction. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I know everyone keeps telling me this is not normal Vienna weather. So yeah, I'm glad that you're all here. So I don't know, excuse me, if you're familiar, but in the geological past, there have been 5 mass extinction events where the dominant species has been completely wiped out. Just ask the dinosaurs about that. And so the way that climate change is going at the moment, a lot of scientists predict that we could be heading towards the 6th mass extinction event, which is obviously a really terrifying thought. So what can we do to protect the species that we have right now? So understanding what drives extinction, what drives climate change, and how certain species respond to these changes is really paramount at the moment to protect the species that we have. So looking at unresolved past extinctions is a really good way of trying to understand the relationship between extinction and primates. So in this talk, I'm going to take 4 primates, and we're going to look directly in the faces of these primates and try and understand why some species are vulnerable and why some species are more resilient to certain changes. So the first primate that we're looking at is Homo floresiensis that you may have seen. This is like 20 years ago now, so it's not that recent, but in the island of Flores in a cave called Liangbua. This is what Tom was mentioning earlier, Gigantopithecus blacki, found from about 1.5 million years all over China. And then towards the end of its life cycle, it was only found in southern China around 300,000 years ago. Homo erectus, we know as a species that obviously we've found from Africa all the way around to Asia. A lot of finds on Java. Not quite sure why, but there is a lot of sites for Homo erectus in Java. And the youngest site that we know of is Ngandong in Java. So we're going to be looking at that one. And then Homo sapiens, here we are. We have done a lot of work in a site in northern Laos called Tam Pa Ling, looking at Homo sapiens presence there during quite earlier time periods. Now, for all of these species, we're going to look at each one, and I'm going to really focus mostly on the dating. And the reason I'm doing that is because when you're looking at extinction, if you don't have the dating right, then you're looking for clues in the wrong places. And I will give you really good examples of how how we had the dating not quite right, and we sort of assumed certain reasons or drivers for extinction that were not actually correct. So it is really important that the dating is good. So we're going to focus a lot on the timing. So where were these primates located? So southern China for Gigantopithecus, the sites we're looking at very close to the border with Vietnam. Homo sapien, that I said, northern Laos, and a site called Tam Pa Ling. Homo erectus there in a site called Ngandong in central Java. And Homo floresiensis on Flores Island in Indonesia. So starting with Homo floresiensis, there we have the complete skeleton laid out there. So this is the cave, Liang Bua. It means cool cave in the local Manggarai language. And it really is. When you're walking up that slope and you're really hot and you walk into the cave, it's lovely and cool inside the cave. So definitely would have been a great place to hang out. So this is the cave. Please excuse a little bit of nudity here, but obviously hominins don't usually wear clothes. So I had to make it very, so this is modern day Liang Bua, and this is obviously Liang Bua in the past. The excavations were pretty extensive at the site, but Roberts and Mike Morwood did a grave digging course in Sydney so that they could learn how to excavate very deeply. And that's how you're able to go deeper. Just to give the example of that, Professor Siono had excavated in this cave down to 3 meters, didn't find anything. We extended that excavation down to 5 and found a new species of human. So it just shows that that was a really good policy to adopt. The excavations were really deep, some of them down to 8 or 9 meters. So that's people at the top there, just for scale, so you can see them. Very, very complex stratigraphy, very, very difficult to work out what's going on. In 2004, you can see we had a number of sectors, the excavations there. By 2012, we'd almost doubled that. So the difference in understanding of the stratigraphy was huge between these two. And this is really important for understanding the chronology, the progression of the chronology. So the original dating, we had carbon-14, uranium series on some flowstones, and we had luminescence dating, but just red TL. Now, normal luminescence dating, which we use on quartz, did not work at this site because it's volcanic. There was no signal. So we had to literally develop a whole new luminescence dating technique to be able to establish some ages at that site. And that was literally my PhD. So we did some dating, some basal ages there. This is where the skeleton was found with a radiocarbon age of 18,000, with the luminescence ages of 1436 around that. So a little bit older, but that was to be expected with the technique that we were developing at the time. So around 18,000. And then it progressed up in ages. So this is myself and Thomas. I love this photo mainly because we look really young. That's why I like showing it. But it's very important because that was the last OSL age that I took at that site. And where I'm sitting, you can see I'm sitting on a little seat there. There is a little mound of this next section that they were about to excavate. So I took this sample and then I went back to Australia. And that part where I was sitting was where they excavated and they found the Hobbit. Yeah, I was literally sitting on the, I was literally sitting on top of where they found the Hobbit, which is insane. So this is the Sector 7 by the wall. When we originally excavated, that's all we saw. So remember, when you're excavating a 3x3 pit, you get a very narrow view of the stratigraphy. In hindsight, when you go back and dig in, you get a much wider view. You think, oh, why didn't you notice that? But at the time, you have a very narrow view of what you're actually looking at. So you can see here the green stars are the carbon-14 dates, samples that we took. And yeah, I was just going to show you, it's not coming on. Oh, there we go. And that's where I took that final age that came out a bit older, about 36 to 40,000 there. So just to show you that it was right on the edge there. So we got an age of 18 to 12,000 for Homo floresiensis. So that was really fried our brains a little bit. We're like, you know, it's very archaic. Human, how are we going to pitch this at 18,000? You know, it's really difficult. We then carried on, we published, and we gave it to the world. Everyone was, immediately quite skeptical, but then everyone kind of came around. We did another 10 years of excavations, okay, to get a better understanding of what's going on. And as we excavated behind Sector 7, you could see we understood this sort of greenish color here. It's like a pedestal of older material. And that's where all of the fossils from Homo floresiensis were actually found, in this older unit, okay? So because we realized that there was this older pedestal unit behind, which we couldn't really see very well when we excavated Sector 7, we realized that we were going to have to do some more dating. So we did a redate about 10 years later. We did the U-series dating, but this time we supplemented with argon-argon dating with some hornblende. We had some really nice volcanic material in there. We also did U-series dating on the bone, so the hobbit material itself. We did laser ablation. You can see the track marks going across here. And we did age depth modeling, because the biggest problem with U-series dating on bone is the leaching of uranium. So you don't really know initially when the uranium was taken up, but then it can also get leached out. So there's all sorts of problems with that. So we do a modeling so we can get an understanding of uranium throughout the bone. And that's the most reliable way of going about it. 10 years later, luminescence had advanced. Luminescence advances very, very quickly. So 10 years ago, you couldn't do something. 10 years later, you can. That's literally how fast it advances. And at this point, we had red TL, but we also had this technique called post-IR RSL. It's a big mouthful. Lots of luminescence is all about acronyms, but it's basically using feldspars. We had developed a way of being able to use feldspars for dating. So what results did we get from this? So there's our original excavations with 18,000 to 12,000 based on the radiocarbon ages, and then a maximum age from the red TL. Now, because it was quite young, we realized that Homo sapiens must have arrived much later. All we could see was Homo floresiensis evidence. We couldn't see any evidence of modern humans at the site. So we assumed that they didn't arrive till around 10,000, which is very, very young. It was always a bit of a question mark, but that's what the data looked like. That's what the evidence looked like. So to look at causes of extinction, we were thinking potentially that volcanic eruption that we could see just below it in the sector. Maybe there was a big volcanic eruption and it caused a problem for Homo floresiensis, and potentially that's why they were wiped out. But with our new dating, we got a much better appreciation of what was actually going. So we were able to date this older pedestal here to get more accurate ages. And what we realized is that the Homo floresiensis material was actually eroding out of this older pedestal. So we have an older pedestal here with the original dating. It was eroding out, and then it was infilled with younger material. Now, that was really hard to see with the original sector that we had. But then we realized that this younger material here is actually 18,000, but this older pedestal is actually much older. And that's where the original in situ material lies that gave us an age of 60 to 50,000. So the deposits and skeletal remains were 100 to 60,000. Stone tools about 190 to 50, but really we're given the age of about 60 to 50. So that's quite different from the 18,000. And because the timing has now shifted, our understanding of the extinction has also shifted, okay? So the boundary between Homo floresiensis and Homo sapiens now is much closer. So if they went extinct at 60 to 50, that gives a much wider area now for Homo sapiens to actually come in. It also presents the idea that perhaps they may have overlapped slightly, or they may have at least come into contact. So potentially the arrival of Homo sapiens is more significant now than we first thought, because there's much more potential now for an overlap. There is a significant vegetation collapse around 60,000, which may have contributed. Now, before, when we thought the extinction was 18, obviously we didn't think that that was relevant. Now we've changed the timing. Suddenly we're looking for different clues, okay? So this is why timing is everything. If you don't get the timing right, there's no way you can establish the causes of extinction. So moving swiftly on now to Homo erectus. So this is Ngandong, Homo erectus site in Java. Traditionally, it was dug in the 1960s by the Dutch. And Originally, when they found the site, so this site is very famous. It has 12 calvaris, so 12 skull caps at the site. There's this really, really well-developed fossil bed at the site. Very, very difficult to date. Now, most scientists previously had focused on dating the fossils themselves, and all sorts of problems with leaching that I was mentioning earlier. They hadn't really sorted out. At this point, luminescence wasn't really applied. Now, it's a river terrace, and luminescence, it's the best technique really for it. But because of the problems with quartz, no one had really applied that technique. So obviously I came in and took advantage of that. So to really establish the age for Ngandong, I wanted to go past just fossil dating. I was like, to really establish it, it's been in the literature for a long time as being as young as 50,000. And I just knew that that wasn't right. At 50,000, there would have been a massive overlap between Homo erectus and modern humans. And it sat in the literature for so long, and it just annoyed me. When I first started my PhD, that was my one goal, was to fix the age for Ngandong, because it just annoyed me. Anyway, so the way I got around it was using 3 approaches. I used in different scales. So landscape, I looked at terrace, and I looked at the fossils as well. So for the landscape, this area here called the Southern Mountains, Gunung Siwu area, didn't used to be a mountain range. So the Solo River used to flow down to the south and come out of the sea there. Then the mountains uplifted, and the Solo River was diverted. And then it started to flow through the Ngandong Hills. And then the Ngandong Hills started to uplift, and that's when we got the terraces. So once we got the terraces, that's when we get the site of Ngandong. So there's a sequence of events here that can be dated. And by doing that, we can constrain what's really going on. The second thing I looked at was the terraces. Now, river terraces are obviously old landscapes of the river before it incisors down. And because a landscape is uplifting so fast in this area, it creates like nice stepped terraces all the way down. So they're really great for dating. And obviously, Ngandong is situated on this 3rd terrace here. So in my mind, I was like, if I date the terrace below it and I date the terrace above it, I'm effectively constraining the site just by its geomorphology rather than even just looking at the fossils. So that was another way of going about it. And then we also had a look at the fossils because we thought we can do better than what's been done. We've got much better techniques these days, and we're better able to equipped to these leaching problems. So we thought we'd have a better crack at being able to date the fossils. So Uranus series was used to date this uplift of the southern mountains. The way we did that was just lots of caving, finding the oldest flow stones that we could possibly find and dating them. We got ages of 400 up to 500,000. So that's just a sort of a minimum age for the uplift, but it gives us a nice maximum age because there's no way that these terraces can be any older than the uplift because obviously we know about the diversion of the river. We did extensive dating post-IR iris cell, so that's infrared iris cell dating on these terraces. And you can see that the age here of the younger terrace, 31,000, and the age of the older terrace above Ngandong at 162, effectively sandwiches in the age of Ngandong. And we got a really nice sequence of terraces there. We also did some excavations. So this is Russell Shihon from University of Iowa. And initially, he had done some excavations at Ngandong, and I had done all the landscape work. And we actually just came together and joined our two effective papers together to make a much stronger paper. And so we did excavations. Now, the biggest problem at this site is digging in backfill. I don't know if you've ever looked at when you put backfill back into a site and then dig it again, it actually looks like stratigraphy. It's very, very difficult to tell that it has been backfilled. So we had to get the plans of the Dutch excavations, and you can see the purple area here is where the Dutch had excavated, and then the yellow as well. And they've pretty much taken out most of the terrace. The only parts that were left, sorry, the yellow parts are the bits that are original. So you can see we focused the excavations, the red dots around those areas that were in situ, and we were able to identify the in situ material versus the bit that was backfilled. The biggest problem, I think, with the original age of 50,000 was because they had been digging in backfill, and they had dated a bovid tooth at 50,000, which was correct age for that tooth, but not the association with the Homo erectus material. So this was all of the information together. It's a little bit confusing diagram, so I'm just going to show you. At the top here, we have the landscape context. So we have the Speleothem age for the uplift of the mountain. So that's our maximum age at the top. Then we have the terrace dating here with all the terrace results. And then we also have the fossils here. So we did a number of techniques here on the fossils. It's a little bit confusing to see here, but the level we're really looking at is level C here, Fascies C, and that's where all the bone-bearing fossils were found. So to pull all this together is quite complicated. Because there's a number of ages and then lots of different dating techniques. So the way we got around this was actually by modeling. And we did the model using OSCAL, which is a way of dealing with lots of different ages. It's usually used for carbon-14, but there are a number of functioners in OSCAL, so you can actually use different dating techniques. And we were able to make this work because we were doing a stratigraphy, and we entered certain ages in based on the nature of the age. So if it was an inherently minimum age estimate, then it was entered in as a minimum age, and the maximum ages were also entered in as maximum ages. So it allowed the model to work. And what we're actually working out is not redating the actual age estimates, but we're actually working out the boundaries between the layers. That's the ages that we're really interested in. So these black lines here are the age of the boundaries with the error margin. And by doing that, because, I mean, if you look at Fascies C, look how many ages there are. How do you pick an age for the age range for that site? It's very difficult. So what we did was actually model it. So we got an age of 117 to 108, and that's just the upper and lower boundary of that fossil layer. So in all, we had 54 radiometric ages. The red TL and argon-argon are maximum ages, so they have arrows going this way. And we have U-series dating on bone, which was minimum ages. So the arrows are going this way. So you can see we've included every age, even though it's much younger than expected. It's a minimum age. We've still included it. So we haven't taken out any outliers whatsoever. So it's very trying to remove the bias from the sampling. So the yellow box represents Fascies C bone-bearing layer here. And that gives us a model age range of 117 to 108. So this is when Homo erectus went extinct from the site of Ngandong, which at the present is the youngest erectus site. Because we have that timeline, now we can start to reconstruct actually what happened to erectus, and then we can start to work out potential causes of extinction. So older than 50,000, we got the uplift of the southern mountains. So we know that the Solo River is diverted north. And then it starts to create these terraces in the Ngandong Hills. About 316,000, the first terrace, which is the top one, is formed above Ngandong. Then around 160,000, we get a large environmental event. Now, we know that there was later a flood in this area, and the flood picked up all the fossils and took them in the river. But we don't think that the flood was potentially the cause of this big mass extinction event. We think there was some large environmental event. It might have been a volcanic eruption. It might have been something else. We're not sure what that event was, but there definitely at that point, something occurred. And then there was so there would have been a lot of carcasses on the landscape. There was a large flood that picked up all of these bodies, took them in the river, and then created what I call a carcass jam in the river, like a wood jam in the river. You know, when all the wood collects, and it would have created this kind of carcass jam and created a bone bed. So that obviously once that fossilized down, you get this very, very high concentration of fossils. And this is why, you know, Ngandong has thousands of fossils all in this one section of the river. And then 31,000, we have the youngest turrets formed. So now that we can identify exactly what happened, this event at about 162,000, we've got a target now to potentially look at stable isotopes or look at the environment to see what was actually going on at that time. Moving swiftly on to Gigantopithecus blacki. So this is a region of southern China. It's dominated by towering karst landscapes. This is obviously some really nice drone footage, so you can actually see the landscape. Gigantopithecus blacki was discovered by von Koningswald. He was in a drugstore in Hong Kong, and he bought this tooth. It was sold to him as a dragon tooth, but really he was like, I don't know, it's a dragon tooth. But he was very interested in the tooth, and he took it. And these are the two teeth that he actually found in the drugstores in Hong Kong. And we realized that it was actually a species of primate. At this point now, we only have 4 mandibles, like the one on the left here, and a couple of thousand teeth. But that's all we know from the entire species. So there's a lot of big question marks. We don't know anything about the neck down postcranial. So that's the next big thing. What did it really look like? But we were really concerned with, why did it go extinct? So it was there from 1.5 million years. And at that point, it was flourishing. There was very large numbers. We find thousands of teeth at that sort of age range, down to about 300,000 when we're only finding 1 or 2 teeth in certain caves. So something happened to Gigantopithecus, and we wanted to find out what. So this nice primate family here, so you can understand where Giganto sits. So Gigantopithecus here next to orangutan, which it's most closely related to. So this is the family tree, primate tree. So Gigantopithecus is an offshoot from the orangutan line. So it's an offshoot about 12 million years ago. So it's most closely related to orangutans. People sort of say, oh yeah, it's King Kong, you know, but it's definitely not, it's not an ape. It's not a great ape. It's definitely a offshoot of an orangutan. So it would have looked a little bit more like an orangutan. If you notice for our reconstruction for the Nature paper, we didn't go with the orange hair because we weren't sure about the orange hair. So we went with brown, but you know, we don't know. We don't know. It may have had orange hair. We don't know. Now, to establish extinction across a wide landscape, we knew, like you know, in alternatively to the other sites where we only had maybe one site that we were looking at, this one we had more than one site, and we thought to establish extinction across a landscape, you need to establish that it drops out across the entire landscape. So we didn't want to just focus on one cave or the youngest cave we could find. So we looked at 22 cave sites. This is why it's such an epic paper. If you downloaded the supplementary, it's nearly 200 pages, which is insane. But we had so many techniques. Unfortunately, we needed all that. So these are just an example of some of the stratigraphy that we'd find. So we have flowstones at the top, a precipitated secondary calcite layer. Then we had some sediments and flowstones, and then we get this breccia layer here that contains the giganto material. Again, we have a suite of dating techniques that needed to be applied just because we have so many different materials in there. And you can look at the list of the luminescence techniques in there that were all used. This is what's so great about luminescence. If you try one thing, if it doesn't work, you can try something else and try something else. There's so many different techniques, which is great. Okay, so I just want to show you one cave of the dating that we're doing. This is Shuangtang Cave. This is probably the youngest cave that we have giganto evidence from. This is a photogrammetry model of the cave. It's a very, very narrow fissure. And what I love about this model is that you can go back, zoom back, and look at sort of views of the cave that you wouldn't be able to see in nature because it's so narrow. You can't get back far enough to take a picture. So that's why I love the modeling. So we have the giganto evidence there where you can see the G, and we have a flowstone, another flowstone down the bottom, and then we have the giganto evidence here. So we put all the dating. So we've got the oldest flowstones here and the younger one above. This is a giganto area here where we found the fossil evidence, the breccia unit. And again, a number of techniques all put together in the same sort of model. When we modeled it, we got a basal age of about 307 and an upper age of about 244. So you can see that's really nicely constraining the stratigraphy that contains giganto evidence. So 22 cave sites, 11 of them contained giganto evidence and 11 of them didn't contain giganto evidence. Because to me, it's like you can't just look at the caves that have giganto. You need to be looking at the caves that don't have it as well, because that's part of the story. So we modeled every single cave in the way I just showed you for Xuantang, getting a basal and an upper age estimate for the boundary of the giganto evidence. These ones obviously didn't have giganto, so we just did a basal and upper age of the fossil bearing unit in each cave. So I plotted all of these on here from the oldest giganto cave down to the youngest non-giganto cave. And you can see that this is all of the giganto evidence, and this is the non. And you can see that I can actually put a little line there between the youngest giganto cave and the oldest non-giganto cave. But I didn't want to just say, okay, this is the youngest and this is the oldest, and that's where I put the line. Because as I said, extinction happens across a landscape. It doesn't just happen in one cave. So we modeled all of the models. So we modeled all of the caves, and then we did a mega model of all of the evidence that we have with the giganto caves in green again, and the non-giganto here. Now, as I said, if I just did a line between the youngest giganto and the oldest non, the line would go there. But when we modeled it, the line actually sits here. And you can see that within the error margins, the line actually overlaps with a few caves, because that's how it would be. It would be an extinction across a landscape. And from that, we were able to get an age range using 2 sigma, 295 to 215. So we're very confident that the extinction of giganto in this region, but also in the world, occurred between that age range. So what does that mean? Well, if we have a really defined, what I call window of extinction, because it doesn't just happen at one time, it's like a bit of a window. Now we know that, now we can confidently start looking at the environment. What was the environment doing during that window extinction, but not just during, the bit before as well, because that's where it's really affecting it. And because we have a really defined timeline, it makes our analysis of the environment very targeted. So I see a lot of people sort of talking about extinction in the late Pleistocene, and they're just looking over such a wide area. It's very hard to kind of work out what the causes might be. But when you have a very defined window, it gives you a better target to aim for when you're looking at the environmental analysis. So the top up here is a pollen analysis, and I've just divided it into arboreal trees, and then we have non-arboreal, and then ferns. Non-arboreal and ferns. And you can see that the earlier phases up to about 700,000 are just dominated by arboreal, as you'd expect, very densely forested regions. And we see an abundance of giganto at this time. Like some caves, we're peeling out, 1,000 teeth or something. So huge numbers of giganto during this period. From about 700, around 700, 600,000, we start to see a change in plant communities. Now, we're still seeing high levels of arboreal, so it's still forested, but we're seeing changes. So the plant communities are changing within that forest. Then you can see we see the extinction window. And then after the extinction window, we see a large rise in non-arboreal and ferns, okay? Now, a lot of people have said that the extinction of giganto is because of deterioration of the forest. And that's certainly true around 100,000. But we know from our target that giganto was already well extinct by that point. So it's not the deterioration of the forest that caused the extinction. If you look back to this section here, you can see it's a change in plant communities that have directly contributed to this extinction window, not necessarily the deterioration of the forest. And if we look more closely at this section here, the change in plant communities, we can start to see, I don't know if you can see at the very top, I've really got a pointer, but the very top of the chart here, there's a darker section. These are the introduction of what we call disturbance taxa. So taxa indicating that there's some disturbance going on in the forest. And that is what giganto is reacting to, not the deterioration of the forest, but the change in plant communities. If we have a look, so we have a fairly good idea of what's going on in the environment. And then we can also, with our targeted age range for extinction, we can have a look at what's going on with the behavior during this period. So we have an early giganto tooth here, Westaway, And that was about 2 million years ago. And these are trace element bands, strontium versus calcium here, looking at what's going on in these early teeth. And this is the first time anyone's been able to really look at what's going on from a sort of behavior perspective. So about 2 million years ago, this strong banding we've interpreted as a high diversity of food sources and that the species were flourishing. And again, the numbers of teeth are really supporting that. If we look at Xuantang, which is, again, the youngest giganto cave that we have, you can see that the banding is there, but it's starting to become very diffuse. So the banding is still apparent, but it's definitely becoming more diffuse. So this is about 300,000 years ago. We're interpreting this as slightly like lower diversity of food sources and a species under chronic stress. So if you look at the changing plant communities have changed within its habitat. Suddenly, there's less fruit available. Now, if you think about Giganto, it's 3 meters tall. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. 3 meters tall, very, very big. It's living on the cave, on the floor of the forest. There's no opportunity to go up into the branches of the tree. 3 meters, it's going to be too heavy. So it's living on the forest floor. So it's waiting for fruit to drop down. If suddenly we go through phases where there's not much fruit production, species such as orangutan will just diversify. They'll change, they'll go to what is called the fallback food. So they'll go to other options up in the top canopy. So they're eating leaves, they're eating flowers, they're eating shoots from the top, sometimes even insects, sometimes even other mammals. So they're quite varied in its fallback options. Giganto's fallback option, when there's no fruit, is things like bark and twigs from the bottom of the forest floor. So you can see very sort of not particularly nutritious and not particularly sustainable for very long. So we can really see these effects of the plant communities on the teeth, and we're starting to see this chronic stress in the populations. And when I mean chronic stress, like as in multiple populations, you can see this diffuse banding showing that the stress is going across generations, which is not great. We see the numbers of Giganto really drastically decrease. I mean, in Xuantang, only 2 Giganto teeth compared to 1.5 when we were getting thousands. So really starting to see that decline of Giganto. And finally, I just wanted to have a quick look at Homo sapiens. So this is a site in northern Laos. It's called the Cave of the Monkeys, which is a little bit ironic considering we found humans there. I think it's just obviously the locals called it that because there are lots of monkeys. It's first excavated in 2010, been ongoing annually. We've got Homo sapien evidence all the way down to about 80,000 at this point. Now, Tam Pa Ling has received a bit of a bad rap, really, mainly because a lot of people are like, but it's just a wash-in, there's no stratigraphy, it's just kind of all dumped in there. Actually, not true. So the excavations that we have at the moment, I've just put on some of the finds. They were literally finding something every meter. And really nice, you can see behind. Stratigraphy, there is stratigraphy there, and the ages are all make sense in succession. So we've got some radiocarbon at the top. And we do have some radiocarbon lower down, but unfortunately, it's just radiocarbon that's been burnt. It's just charcoal that's been burnt on the landscape and then washed in the cave. So it doesn't really have much relevance to the actual dating of the units. This blue is actually quartz single grain dating. And you can see I could actually do some quartz single grain. But you'll notice here, 46, 46, 48. It's not really getting older, despite the fact that we're going deeper. And that's because the quartz is saturating. So quartz saturates at much lower levels than feldspars. So we added in some feldspar dating, and you can see that feldspar dating is correlates here, and then it starts to increase, whereas the quartz doesn't. So that's just showing the quartz gets saturated. So we supplemented with post-IR on feldspars. Towards the 70 to 80,000, even the feldspars started to weather. So then we moved to another option, which is called fine grain dating. And that's what's so good about luminescence. If you run into problems, you can use another technique. So we did some fine grain dating. We also managed to find some bovid teeth for dating. So we did some U series on the teeth, Renault from Southern Cross. And we also did some U-series ESR on some teeth as well. So there's quite a nice sequence now of dating all the way down from about 80,000 up to 46,000. So we're seeing a substantial period here in which we have a human presence. So definitely not a dump of sediments, definitely very quite slow sedimentation really developing in this cave. So again, we were able to model all of the ages that we had. So I've just put the finds down the side here so you can see this. So the modeling is really important because the lower finds that we've got from, we've got a tibia here, a frontal section, a rib, and the chin as well. Very different in morphology to the skull and the mandible that we found in the upper levels. So we think potentially different migrations. The older was from about 80,000 up to almost 56 around this area here. And we think that that was definitely a different migration, potentially a migration that may or may not have been successful moving onwards. And then we have the younger, which was originally found, the skull and the mandible, definitely a later migration, very much more modern in its morphology. So the modeling was able to pull apart these different migrations and help us understand what was really going on there. But now we have an age range of 80,000 to 46. So I'm using this as more of a example of perseverance in the cave and, you know, adaptation to certain environments. So if we pull all these together, all of the primates that we've just looked at, so we have Gigantopithecus, definitely vulnerable, mainly because it was locked into an evolutionary path, very much like the African elephant. It was out on the plains. It eats pretty much everything, and it has to eat a lot to keep going. But the food it eats, like it pretty much eats a whole tree. It's not particularly nutritious, so it has to eat a lot of it. And these kind of species are very much locked in their evolutionary path, and there's no way that they can change. And when the forest starts to change, not necessarily deteriorate, but just even change its species, its fauna, it couldn't really adapt. And that's why it ran into problems. In the same way, Homo erectus, pretty vulnerable. Remnants of archaic fauna wiped out by encroaching rainforests. So we have this encroaching rainforest coming down. We think that Ngandong Hills is a little bit of a sort of an oasis there where the fauna lasted much longer than would be expected. But after a while, that environmental changes sort of wiped out that fauna. Again, there was a large environmental event, which we don't really know what it was. I'd love to find out what that was, but that caused the extinction there of Homo erectus. And then Homo floresiensis, again, very vulnerable. Potentially maybe some competition there with modern humans, but again, there was that vegetation collapse earlier that may have made it slightly vulnerable in the first place. Modern humans came in, outcompeted, and no longer around. Mountain gorillas, so if we're looking at modern primates, mountain gorillas are also quite vulnerable. They're also locked into a very sort of specific ecosystem, locked into that evolutionary path. Unlike orangutans, now when we were doing the work on Giganto, we compared it a lot with archaic orangutans to see what they were doing. They're much more able to adapt. So we're looking at the stable isotopes of Giganto. Giganto, even when the forest was changing, still kept in that forest environment. But we looked at the isotopes of orangutans, and when the forest changed, they were able to move into more open environments and be quite successful in those open environments and then move back again, which is something that Giganto was not able to do. So we think that orangutans are actually a little bit more resilient. They had a much more flexible fallback food. And I think that's really the key, that they had an alternate option that helped them survive. And then obviously Homo sapiens, very resilient, very adaptive, this kind of adaptive plasticity, so they can sort of adapt to any environmental niche. Obviously, we have Homo sapiens in coastal areas, we have them in desert areas, we have them even in high altitude areas. So much more able to adapt to these different environmental niches and much more resilient. So this really helps us to kind of understand the difference between resilience and vulnerability across a number of primates. So the only reason that we can really understand this difference between resilience and being resilient and being more vulnerable is because of this accurate dating. So the timing really helps us to pinpoint the exact moment when they disappeared, and then we're looking for clues in the right places. It helps us also to more precisely look at the environmental data, looking at sort of whitewashing environmental data across the whole, late Pleistocene and trying to pick out environmental drivers is very difficult. But when you have a defined period that you're looking at and then look at that period directly before, it's a really good way of being able to really pick out the causes. Primates can be vulnerable or resilient to these environmental stresses, and understanding which ones are vulnerable and which ones are more resilient is really important moving forward, because it has real implications for our strategy for dealing with potential extinctions of modern day primates. So I think this is really useful information that we can use moving forward. That's it. Thank you.